Currently, my boys are 8 and 6. At the time, they were 4 and 2. We lived in a small house in rural Virginia, just me and them, after my husband walked out. I'm a single mom, 32 now, working as a nurse and doing my best to keep things together. Our place was cozy, nothing fancy, with a creaky wooden floor and a big bay window in the living room. The boys, Ethan and Lucas, were always running around, making a mess, but they were good kids. About 2 years ago, something started happening that freaked me out at first, but ended up changing how I see things. It's still hard to talk about without getting choked up. It started one afternoon when I was in the kitchen, chopping veggies for dinner. Ethan, my 4-year-old, was in the living room with Lucas, playing with their toy cars. I could hear them giggling, which wasn't unusual, but then I noticed they were talking to someone, not just each other. It was like a real conversation. Ethan asking questions, Lucas babbling back, and then both of them laughing like someone told a joke. I peeked around the corner and saw them sitting in the corner by the bookshelf, staring at the empty space in front of them, grinning like they were chatting with an old friend. "Who you guys talking to?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Ethan looked up, all serious, and said, "Grandpa." My heart stopped. My dad, their grandpa, died 3 years before Ethan was born. He was the best, always sneaking me candy as a kid, teaching me to fish. His heart gave out when I was 25, and I missed him every day. I laughed it off, thinking Ethan was just being a kid with a big imagination. "Oh yeah. What's Grandpa saying?" I asked, trying to keep it light. Ethan shrugged and said, "He's telling us stories about when he was little." "He's funny." Lucas, who barely talked yet, just nodded and giggled, pointing at the corner. I felt a chill, but brushed it off. Kids make up stuff, right? But it kept happening. Every few days, I'd catch them in that corner, whispering and laughing, always saying it was Grandpa. Ethan's speech wasn't great. He still mumbled a lot. But when he talked about Grandpa, his words were clear as day. "Grandpa says he used to climb trees and fall in the creek," he'd say, or "Grandpa likes Lucas's cars." Once I asked Ethan what Grandpa looked like, and he described my dad to 8 feet tall, with a gray beard, wearing his old flannel shirt and that goofy fishing hat he loved. I hadn't shown the boys any pictures of him recently, so that hit me hard. I started getting uneasy. The corner they kept going to was always cold, even in summer, and sometimes I'd hear the floor creak there at night, like someone was standing on it. I tried to tell myself it was just an old house, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was up. I didn't want to scare the boys, so I didn't make a big deal out of it, but I started watching them closer. One evening, I caught Ethan sitting alone in the corner, whispering, "Grandpa, why don't you talk to Mommy?" My stomach flipped. I asked him about it later, and he just said, "Grandpa says you're too busy, but he's watching us." I didn't sleep much that night, lying awake, wondering if I was losing it. Then I had the dream. It was a few weeks after this all started, around 2 a.m. I was exhausted from a double shift at the hospital and crashed hard. In the dream, I was sitting on a porch swing, like the one we had when I was a kid at my parents' house. My dad was next to me, looking just like he did before he passed. Gray beard, flannel shirt, that warm smile. He didn't say much, just swung with me, the air smelling like summer grass. I felt so safe, like when I was little. Then he looked at me and said, "I'm keeping an eye on those boys for you, kiddo. They're good kids." His voice was so clear, so real, I woke up crying, my pillow soaked. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, but not from fear. It was like a weight lifted off me. I don't know much about spirits or whatever, but that dream felt like Dad telling me he was still around, watching over Ethan and Lucas. The next morning, I asked the boys if they'd seen Grandpa lately. Ethan nodded, saying he was here last night telling Lucas a story about a frog. Lucas clapped his hands, babbling, "Frog? Grandpa?" I didn't push them to stop talking to him after that. I even started leaving an extra chair out in the living room, just in case. We moved to a new place last year, closer to my job, and the boys don't talk about Grandpa as much now. But sometimes when it's quiet, Ethan will smile at that same corner of the new house and say, "Grandpa's checking in." I don't know if it's really him or just their imaginations, but that dream changed me. I like to think Dad's out there, keeping an eye on us, making sure my boys are safe. If any of you have had your kids see someone who's gone, how you handle it. It's comforting, but it's also a little spooky, and I'd love to know how to make peace with it. I've always had this weird pull toward the paranormal. Back when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with writing dark, creepy poetry, stuff that'll make your skin crawl. I've never been a social butterfly, more of a loner, maybe with one close friend if I'm lucky. Anyway, let me get to the story. My parents split up when I was young, and it hit me hard. I got pretty depressed and spent a lot of time by myself. We ended up moving in with my grandparents, and they set us up in a little house right next to theirs, so close you could practically spit and hit their front door. My mom was always over at their place, hanging out, but I liked staying alone in our new spot. One night, I was fast asleep in the dark when I had this messed up dream. There was this guy with a pitch black face sitting at the foot of my bed, just staring at me. I jolted awake, heart pounding, feeling like someone was right there with me. I snapped out of it, flipped on the light, and bolted to my grandparents' house. I plopped down next to my grandma and said, "That house creeps me out." She looked at me all casual and said, "Well, yeah. 2 guys died in there from a gas leak when they were renting it. We didn't find them for a week." She dropped that bomb like it was no big deal, and it felt like a punch to the gut. That was just the start, though. As I got older, my mom remarried, and my grandparents moved to another house of theirs about 150 meters away. I was left alone in their old place, a big, creaky, ancient house, for a whole year and a half. Even though their new place wasn't far, I was on my own, and that house was straight up eerie. I was a student, grinding away on my graduation project, so I barely left except to grab groceries. I stuck to the living room, kitchen, and bathroom because everywhere else gave me the heebie-jeebies, like I was being watched constantly. The house had 2 long hallways. One led to the bathroom, and the other went to my grandparents' old bedroom, which was huge and always locked since they kept their stuff in there. That second hallway was the worst. You'd stand at the start of it, and it was so dark it felt like it stretched on forever. I avoided it like the plague. You just know when something's off in a place like that. Late at night, like 2 or 3 a.m., I'd hear banging on the door. I try to brush it off, act tough, because what else could I do? I had nowhere else to go. I'd lock the living room door, though the lock was crap, and prop a chair against it for good measure, then crank up the TV to drown out the noise and try to sleep. One night, I was sick as a dog, burning up with a fever and half out of it. I woke up to the sound of the chair moving. Then I saw it, a small, dark, shadowy figure peeking at me through the crack in the door. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I stumbled up, flipped on the light, and checked. The chair was pushed aside, and the door was slightly open. I lost it, started crying, and called my parents, but it was 3 a.m., and no one picked up. I prayed, tried to calm myself down, and told myself I was just imagining things. A couple months later, I was watching this YouTube video about jinn, the demon-like creatures from Islamic belief. It was called 30 Facts You Didn't Know About Jinns. The last fact was something like, "Jinns live among us, and one could be watching you right now." I laughed and said, "Yeah, I'm not scared, but deep down, I knew I'd regret that." That night, I played some Quran recitations to keep the shadow people, or jinn, away, like my religion says. And I swear, at 2 a.m., I woke up to 3 shadow figures dancing around me. One was at my feet, one at my head, and one hovering right over my face. They were making this weird, static-like noise that grated on my nerves. I screamed at them to leave me alone, and they vanished, leaving everything quiet. After that, insomnia hit me hard. I couldn't sleep at night anymore. I'd stay up studying, working on my project, cooking, watching TV, playing video games, and only crash around 6 a.m. when the sun started coming up. One time, I fell asleep and had this dream that felt so real, it didn't even seem like a dream. I started hearing whispers, not soft ones, but angry, evil ones, like a chorus straight out of hell. The closest thing I can compare it to is the soundtrack from Dante's Inferno. Quiet but loud, aggressive, and just wrong. I'd hear it in my ears, always around the same time, but it was never the same. In the dream, I got up to find where it was coming from, and it led me to that creepy locked room at the end of the hallway. I'm pretty sure it was haunted from being sealed up so long. As I got closer, this bald, short guy with muscular arms and bulging veins stepped out of the darkness. He stared right through me, like he could see my soul. I started reciting a prayer, and at the same time, I heard my cousin screaming from the stairs to my left, yelling at me to run. The door was to my right, so I bolted for it, but it felt like something was pulling me back. I made it out gasping for air, thinking this thing was chasing me. When I woke up, I heard the whispering in my ear again. A while later, my grandparents came to stay for a bit. My grandma always slept with the light on. One night, I woke up feeling off, and I swear I saw a giant little girl standing there, holding something in her left arm. Her eyes were wild, like nothing I'd ever seen, and she was grinning at me. She was holding this little dwarf-like guy with grayish skin and a tail, and he was staring at my grandma. I didn't know what to do, so I just tried to go back to sleep and pretended they weren't there. Another time, I was sleeping and felt like I was talking to someone or something. I thought it was a dream, but when I opened my eyes, I couldn't see them, yet I was still arguing with them. They were saying, "You should let us in. You're done for anyway. Nobody wants you. Your parents left. We're the only ones who'll help you now." I was terrified and didn't trust them. They kept pressuring me, and I felt so lost and alone. I woke up crying, a total mess. One night, I dreamed I was in this huge, fancy bedroom in a castle, all decked out like something from a movie. There was this old woman who looked like a stereotypical witch, and she was at a funeral or something. She was mad, demanding I let her in. I made fun of her, and she stormed off. Then another one showed up, this one deaf and mute. It was such a bizarre dream. Later, my grandma started sleeping in her old bedroom and swore I was messing with her at night, running around her bed, throwing stuff, pulling off her covers. I had no clue what she was talking about. One time, she woke up screaming, and we found half her stuff burned next to her. Candles, no lighters, no explanation. She left that same night. Eventually, I grew up, graduated, got a job, and moved out of the country. I'm working in the Middle East now, living alone in a room in local housing. One morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. to find this white fog right in my face, covering me. I lay there frozen, watching it turn pitch black and then vanish. I still have no idea what it was. When my sister was quite young, our grandmother bought her a porcelain doll. The doll wasn't anything special. It wasn't an antique or anything like that. It was just one you would buy at a novelty shop. It was on a stand and couldn't be moved without possibly breaking it. She had this doll for a few years before my parents divorced. I'm a guy 23 now, but back then I was about 15, living with my mom and sister in a small town in Oregon. After the divorce, we moved to a new house, a fixer-upper with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it was all Mom could afford. My sister, Lily, was 10 and insisted on bringing that doll, which she named Rosie, along. I thought it was creepy with its blank blue eyes and frilly dress, but she loved it, so we set it up on her dresser. That's when things started getting weird. The first week in the new house, I noticed the doll wasn't on the dresser one morning. It was on the living room coffee table, standing upright like someone had placed it there. I figured Lily was messing around, so I asked her, but she swore she hadn't touched it. "Rosie doesn't like being moved," she said, all serious, which gave me a chill. I put it back on her dresser, thinking maybe Mom had moved it while cleaning. But a few days later, it happened again. This time, the doll was in the kitchen, perched on the counter next to the sink. Lily was freaked out, and Mom just laughed it off, saying one of us was playing a prank. I wasn't so sure. It kept happening. The doll would show up in random places, on the stairs, in the hallway, once even in my room, sitting on my desk chair. I'm not gonna lie, it was freaking me out. I started locking my door at night, but Lily said she didn't want Rosie in her room anymore, so Mom moved the doll to a shelf in the basement. That didn't stop it. A couple days later, I found it back on the coffee table, its head tilted like it was watching me. I yelled for Mom, but she was at work, and Lily was at a friend's house. I was alone with that thing, and I swear its eyes followed me when I walked by. I called my buddies Jake and Sam, who were always up for weird stuff. They came over that weekend, and I told them about the doll. Jake, who's into ghost hunter shows, was all excited, saying it might be haunted. Sam rolled his eyes but went along with it. We brought the doll to the living room, and Jake pulled out a Ouija board he borrowed from his cousin. I wasn't thrilled about messing with that stuff, but I wanted answers. We sat in a circle, put our fingers on the planchette, and Jake asked, "Who's moving the doll?" The thing slid to Sandy, then Zammerman. We asked more questions, and it spelled out that Candy was a girl who lived here and liked the doll. My heart was pounding. Our house was old, but we didn't know anything about past owners. Sam said it was probably Jake moving the planchette, but even he looked spooked when it kept spelling Candy without us asking. We stopped the session when Lily got home, not wanting to scare her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, I was in bed, scrolling on my phone around midnight, when I heard a faint creak, like porcelain on wood. My room was dark, but the moonlight came through the window, and I saw it. Rosie, standing in my doorway, her head tilted, those glassy eyes locked on me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. She wasn't on her stand, just standing there, like she'd walked in on her own. I'm not ashamed to admit I screamed, loud enough to wake the house. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the doll, and ran to the closet, throwing it inside and slamming the door. I wedged a chair under the knob, my hands shaking so bad I could barely move. Mom came running, asking what was wrong, and I told her about the doll. She looked skeptical, but saw how freaked out I was. Lily started crying, saying she didn't want Rosie anymore. The next morning, Mom wrapped the doll in a blanket and put it in a box in the garage, saying we'd get rid of it later. I refused to go near it. Jake did some digging online and found an old newspaper article about a family named Zimmerman who lived in our house in the 1950s. They had a daughter named Candace who died young. Nobody knew how. It might have been a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. We moved out a year later when Mom got a better job, and we left the doll behind, still boxed up. I don't know what happened to it, and I don't care. I'm in college now, and I don't mess with Ouija boards or old dolls anymore. Back in 1996, when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me, she got this wild idea to mess around with a Ouija board with her sister. My grandma had passed away about 3 months earlier, and they were desperate to see if they could reach her. They swear they were talking to what they thought was my grandma, who died in that very house. They chatted for about half an hour, everything seeming okay, until the planchette jerked hard and the room turned freezing cold. The thing started zooming across the board, spelling out mine, 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 over and over. It freaked my mom out so bad they slammed the session shut. A few weeks later, my mom went into labor, way too early, at just 7.5 months. She was terrified, and when I was born, I was so tiny I had to stay in the hospital for 2 extra weeks. But eventually, we both made it home, and everything seemed fine. Fast forward to when I was 4, I started having these awful night terrors. I dreamed I was stuck at the top of the stairs in our house. Even though it was daytime in the dream, it was dark, like the light couldn't touch the place. My feet were glued to the floor, like I was sinking in quicksand, and I'd scream for what felt like forever. Every time, at the end of the dream, I'd see something crawling up toward me, slowly. It was this skinny, long-limbed black creature with freakishly long fingers and even longer, darker fingernails. Its eyes burned this intense red. The dreams hit me almost every night. After a while, I got good at waking myself up when that thing started showing up. I told my mom about it, and she just brushed it off, saying I shouldn't stay up late reading scary stories. Her tune changed when my little sister started saying creepy stuff. My sister was 2.5, super sharp for her age. Every night, she and my mom had this bedtime game where my mom would ask her to spell a word, and if she got it right, she'd get a little prize. One night, as my mom was tucking us in, my sister looked up and said, in this creepy sing-song voice straight out of a horror movie, "Mummy, can you spell black man better run?" It sent chills down my spine. That same night, I woke up to something bizarre. There was an old lady standing at the foot of my bed. She looked so real I thought some random grandma had wandered into my room. I screamed, flipped on a light, and poof, she was gone. I was so freaked out I kept the light on after that. I couldn't handle the dark anymore. It felt like it was choking me. But then I woke up in the dark again. I didn't even remember falling back asleep. That same old lady was there, at the edge of my bed. This time, I knew she wasn't human. Her skin was blue, her teeth were rotting, and her eyes were this unnatural, glowing blue. She was staring at me, smiling, and then she started laughing. It began as a little giggle, but turned into this unhinged cackle, like she'd lost her mind. She threw her head back, laughing harder and harder, and her mouth started stretching, unhinging like a snake's jaw. I was frozen, mouth hanging open, too shocked to even cry. Then, mid-laugh, she snapped her head forward and said in a deep, fast male voice, "If you're scared, cover your head, little piggy, because I'm not going to stop." I yanked the blankets over my face so fast, and she started laughing again. I stayed under there, scared out of my mind for what felt like hours. Finally, I woke up for real, and it was daylight. I told my mom everything, and she called my grandpa, who was a pastor. He came over, blessed the house, and things calmed down for a while. But when I was a teenager, I moved into my own bedroom downstairs, while my sister stayed upstairs. Every single night, without fail, I'd wake up at 4:30 a.m. to the sound of creaking on the stairs, like footsteps coming down. They'd get closer and closer until they reached my door. Then my door would slowly creak open. I'd look, heart pounding, but no one was ever there. After a minute or two, the door would slowly close again. We finally moved when I was 17, and I hadn't noticed anything creepy besides the door thing in years. One night, my mom, my sister, and I were all piled on my mom's bed, watching TV. It was June, and we'd had these nasty thunderstorms all day. The storm got so bad the power cut out, and since it was late, we decided to call it a night. Then, out of nowhere, all three of us woke up at the exact same time. It was still dark, and the room was freezing, even though it was summer and the AC was off. We all gasped at the same time because there, in the bedroom doorway, was a figure at least 7 feet tall. Then I heard it, that same cackling laugh from years ago. I knew exactly who it was. The figure whispered, "I found you," and the words burned into my brain. My whole body locked up. The black man had found us. Then, just like that, he vanished, like he'd never been there. Nothing happened for years after that. That is, until I moved to Florida with my boyfriend, who's now my husband. He worked third shift, so I was often up at night, unable to sleep. One night, around 1 a.m., I stepped outside to smoke a joint. Our house is small, with a tiny front yard, so I figured I'd smoke quick and head back in. As I finished and started walking, I saw a long black arm with black claws stretching down from the roof, like it was reaching for my hair. It was nothing human. I told my husband, and he thought I was losing it, worried about my health. That is, until he saw it too, the black thing on our roof, just the other day. Now I'm left wondering, why is he up there? And when's he going to try to come inside? I was 10 or 11 years old and was sleeping in my grandma's guest bedroom. Next to the bed was an antique easy chair. When I woke up the next morning, I looked over towards the chair, and sitting there was a little girl. She had dark hair done up in pigtails, tied with a blue ribbon, and wore an old-fashioned dress, like something from the early 1900s. I'm a guy, pretty typical kid back then, always in my grandma's house in rural Wisconsin during summer breaks. Her place was this old Victorian, full of creaky floors and dusty furniture, the kind of house that felt like it had stories to tell. That morning, though, I wasn't ready for the story I got. The girl was just sitting there, her hands folded in her lap, looking right at me. Her skin was pale, almost see-through, and her eyes were big and sad, like she was waiting for something. I froze, my heart pounding, but I wasn't as scared as I probably should have been. It was more like I was confused. She didn't feel threatening, just there. I blinked a few times, thinking I was still half asleep, but she didn't move. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She didn't answer, just tilted her head slightly, the blue ribbon catching the morning light. Then, in a blink, she was gone, like she'd never been there. The chair was empty, no indent, no nothing. I sat up, my skin prickling, and checked around the room, but it was just me and the usual clutter of Grandma's knickknacks. I told my grandma about it at breakfast, expecting her to laugh it off, but she got this weird look like she knew something. "That's just the house," she said, stirring her coffee. Old places have their quirks. She wouldn't say more, and I didn't push, but I couldn't shake the image of that girl. I didn't see her again that summer, and I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe a weird dream from eating too many of Grandma's cookies before bed. A few months later, it was Easter Sunday, and we were back at Grandma's for the holiday. I was up early, before the egg hunt, sitting in the living room with a glass of orange juice. The house was quiet, everyone else still asleep or getting ready for church. I was on the old velvet sofa, flipping through a comic book, when I felt that same prickly feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up, and there she was again, the same girl, same blue ribbon, same old-fashioned dress, sitting on the other end of the sofa. She was clearer this time, like a photo coming into focus, but still kind of shimmery, like I could see the wall through her. I didn't say anything, just stared, my comic book slipping to the floor. She looked at me, her eyes still sad but softer now, like she recognized me. I felt this urge to say something, but didn't know what. Instead, I just nodded like we were sharing some secret. She nodded back, a tiny movement, and her lips curved into a small, shy smile. For a moment, we just sat there, not talking, just existing together. It wasn't scary, but it was heavy, like she was trying to tell me something without words. Then, like before, she vanished, poof, gone, leaving the sofa empty. I sat there, my heart racing, but I felt oddly calm, like I just had a conversation without saying a word. I didn't tell anyone this time, not even Grandma. It felt private, like it was just between me and the girl. I kept going back to that house every summer, but I never saw her again. Years passed, and I mostly pushed it to the back of my mind, figuring it was just a kid's imagination running wild. I'm 25 now, living in a different state, working as a mechanic, but I still think about those moments sometimes, especially when I visit Grandma, who's still in that old house. Last year, a buddy of mine, Nate, moved to my hometown and ended up renting my grandma's place after she moved in with my aunt. I was visiting him, catching up over some beers in that same living room, when he got quiet and said, "Yo, you ever see anything weird in this house?" My heart skipped a beat. "Like what?" I asked, playing it cool. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "I keep seeing this little girl, maybe 8 or 9, with pigtails and a blue ribbon. She just sits there, like on the couch or in that old chair upstairs, staring at me. Freaked me out the first time, but she doesn't do anything, just looks sad." I nearly dropped my beer. I told him about my 2 encounters, the chair, the sofa, the silent nod, and he went pale, saying it sounded exactly like what he'd seen. We tried to dig into the house's history, but all we found was that it was built in the 1890s, owned by a few families over the years. No records of a little girl dying there, but old houses like that don't always spill their secrets. Nate says she still shows up sometimes, always quiet, always with that blue ribbon. I don't know who she was or why she's still there, but those moments with her felt real, like she was trying to connect. I'm not big on ghosts or whatever, but I can't explain it any other way. Growing up in a military family, we moved all over the place, so I never really got the chance to keep friends for long. Add in my crippling social anxiety, and making friends was pretty much a lost cause for me. This story kicks off after we'd been living in rural Newfoundland for about 3 years. I was 14, had 0 friends, my home life was rough, and I was honestly pretty depressed. We lived on about an acre of land with a river cutting us off from a massive stretch of raw forest, millions of acres, full of ATV trails. That forest was creepy as hell, with stuff I saw in there that'd make horror movies look tame. There was the bear trap forest, the 40-foot swamp, an abandoned suburb in the middle of nowhere, and this random house deep in the woods, but those are stories for another day. It was late August, and for weeks, my parents had been talking about hearing hoots and hollers coming from our backyard. They'd seen flashlights and figured it was just some kids trying to sneak into our garage to swipe some beer. I'd heard it too, usually in the evenings, just a few voices yelling now and then. One night, I heard what sounded like several voices talking just across the river in the woods. No big deal, I thought. Tons of kids hung out in those woods, and with my social anxiety, I had 0 interest in chatting them up. After weeks of this, one afternoon around 4 p.m., I heard the kids doing their usual hollering and thought, Screw it. I'm gonna see what's so fun about this. So I headed into the woods, following an ATV trail my neighbor used, maybe 300 feet in. That's when I met one of them. His name was Jack, a kid a year or two younger than me, a foot shorter, wearing these super outdated clothes. He seemed kinda shocked to see me, but we said hi, and I told him I'd been hearing them for a while and wanted to check it out. Jack got all excited and insisted I follow him to see what he and his friends were working on. He led me to this clear-cut area in a dense part of the woods, a spot I knew from exploring alone, but this setup was brand new. Two other kids were there, Elvis, who was my age, and Louie, who was maybe 2 years older. They said they were building a treehouse or fort and asked if I wanted to help. I was floored. Nobody had ever asked me to hang out before, so I jumped at the chance. They showed me around their project. Now, I gotta talk about these kids close. When I say outdated, I mean straight up early 80s bad. Neon colors, one kid even had shoulder pads. It was a disaster. They all wore big rubber boots, and they looked too perfect, like they just stepped out of a catalog. No pimples, hair all neat, clothes crisp as anything. I figured they were wearing their parents' old hand-me-downs or something. They said they were friends, not brothers, so I didn't think much of it. These kids were super nice to me, like genuinely friendly. I never really got to know them. They wouldn't talk about their home lives, but that wasn't unusual where I lived. We used hatchets, saws, ropes, and nails to build this awesome fort. It had 8-foot walls made of birch trees, a table we put together, and a lookout post in the biggest tree we could find. The whole thing was about the size of a one-bedroom apartment, and we were all pretty stoked about it. One day we were chilling at the table, talking about random stuff like our favorite trees, and I asked Elvis why I'd never seen him around. We lived in a small town with only 2 schools, and if he was nearby, he'd have to go to mine. He swore he went to the other school, but we didn't know any of the same classmates or teachers. It was weird, but I didn't care too much. These guys actually talked to me, and that was enough. About 2 weeks after meeting them and working on the fort, I told them I had to head home to grab some food. I asked if they wanted anything, since my parents always cooked way too much, and our house was basically right there. They got weirdly hostile, not about the food, but about crossing the river. They flat out refused. Louis spun some story about how crossing a stranger's river was bad luck, and I wasn't about to push it. I offered to bring back a pie for us to share, and they apologized for getting mad, saying they were just superstitious. I let it go, and we spent the rest of the day planning to scout the woods for some thick pine trees. A week later, I went back to the fort, and the kids looked rough. Jack especially looked like he'd been through hell, pale, clammy, like he'd caught the flu, and then some. Their clothes were a mess, all wet and greasy looking, and their hair was slicked down. I asked Jack if he was okay, and he brushed it off, saying it was just the flu. They all looked like they'd been wearing the same clothes for days, which wasn't shocking. Plenty of kids in town were dirt poor and did the same. We hung out for maybe an hour before they took off, with Louis saying he'd see me tomorrow as Jack and Elvis walked away, coughing like chain smokers. I told my parents about these kids, and they thought it was odd, but they were just happy I'd found some friends, so they didn't ask too many questions. By this point, the nighttime hollering had stopped, and we hadn't seen those flashlights again. The next day, I headed back to the fort with a hatchet and a bag of nails, ready to put a roof on the lookout. But when I got there, the place was trashed. The walls were torn down, the table was split in half, and the lookout was barely holding together. Worst of all, everything looked like it was rotting, like it had been sitting there for decades. The table was practically disintegrating, and there was mold growing on what used to be a solid tree trunk. I just stood there thinking, what the hell? I figured some jerks must have found the fort and wrecked it. I waited for the kids to show up. I came back the next day, and the day after that, and for a whole week, but they never came. I was gutted. I wanted to look for them, but they'd never told me where they lived, just vaguely up the hill. My parents noticed I was down and asked why I wasn't hanging out with them anymore. I told them what happened, and they just said the kids probably didn't want to be my friends anymore and that I didn't need them. I was bummed out for a long time. Now, I'm 29, and I was telling my wife about these kids and the fort we built. I described how they looked, how they acted, and how it was a great memory with a sad ending. She looked at me, eyes wide, and said, "You were hanging out with a bunch of spooky ghost kids." I thought she was nuts, but she asked, "Did anyone else ever see them?" And, well, no, they didn't. My parents saw flashlights and heard voices, but nobody else ever laid eyes on Jack, Elvis, or Louie. I couldn't find any records of them, and nobody at the school they supposedly went to knew them. They never showed me their house or came to mine, even when I offered. My wife said it was some creepy stuff and told me I should share it with you all. So, what do you guys think? I've had some weird, unexplainable stuff happen to me over my 36 years, things that might just be supernatural. When I was a kid, I got creeped out so bad in my room that my mom got me one of those little red bed tents we love in the 80s. It was like my safe zone. Even later, when I was in the Navy, I ran into some strange situations at sea. But as I grew up, I turned into a hardcore skeptic. Even when weird things popped up as an adult, I just shrugged them off, figuring there was some science behind it I didn't understand. About 3 years ago, maybe a bit more, my life was in a rough spot. The VA screwed up and declared me dead, which was just one more thing in a string of bad events that had me feeling like the future was bleak. During that time, my buddy, basically a brother I'd known since I was 6, moved in with me. His life was tanking too, so we were just two dudes in a rut. I also had 2 girls related to an ex-girlfriend living in my finished basement to escape their abusive family. The basement's separate from the house. You have to go outside to get to it, so it was like their own little apartment. They were 21 and 18, and I let them stay rent-free as long as they helped with my son, cleaned, and cooked a couple meals a week. They're part of this story later, but for now, they were the ones who suggested to me and my buddy that we check out YouTube videos about bargaining with the supernatural. One night, we decided to watch a bunch of videos on summoning demons and trading stuff for a better future. The videos weren't super helpful, but we figured we'd start small and play this game called Charlie. If you don't know it, you take a piece of paper, draw 4 squares, write yes or no in opposite corners, put one pencil in the center, and balance another pencil on top. Then you ask Charlie, is X true? And the top pencil is supposed to spin toward yes or no. We tried it a few times, and it worked well enough that my buddy posted a video on Facebook of the pencil moving on its own. Feeling pumped and thinking we could score big, we smoked some really strong weed and came up with a plan for our deal. We figured everyone who sold their soul to the devil did it in a rush for fame or riches without thinking it through. So we came up with what we called a 30 for 30 trade. I was about 33 at the time and thought 30 years of serving some evil entity after death for 30 years of a good life wasn't a bad deal. I didn't want fame. That seemed like too much hassle. I just wanted enough money to make sure my 2 sons, who live with me full-time, were set for life, and I could feel successful without worrying about how I got there. With that in mind, I annoyed my cat until it scratched me enough to draw blood. I pressed my thumb into the cut and then onto the Charlie paper. That, I'm pretty sure, is what kicked off all the weird crap that's still going on. My buddy, who was raised Christian, wouldn't put his blood on the paper. He started backing off, becoming more of a bystander as I kept going. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I laid out my deal: 30 years of service after death for 30 years of wealth and influence. No fame, just enough cash to take care of my boys and live comfortably. Nothing dramatic happened. No spinning pencil, no flickering lights, no cold breeze. But my buddy and I both got this creepy feeling, like someone was watching us. We turned around, thinking maybe the girls had come upstairs or one of my sons had woken up, but the house was empty. My buddy crashed on one of the sofas, and I passed out on my recliner in front of the coffee table with the bloody Charlie paper. I felt uneasy, like someone was staring at me while I was taking a leak or something, but I slept anyway. The next morning, I went about my usual routine and didn't even think about the night before until I grabbed my coffee cup. My buddy was still out cold. I'm always the first one up. I sat back down in my recliner, and when I went to set my coffee on the table, I noticed this weird handprint facing me. The fingertips were pointed toward where I'd slept. It was smaller than my hand, with thin fingers, and only had 4 digits, 3 fingers and a thumb. The strangest part was the nails looked like claws, leaving these pointed impressions in the table's dark surface. Not like they scratched the wood, but like a hot, sweaty, weirdly shaped hand had been there just long enough to leave a faint mark. And it was just one handprint, not two. I took a picture because it was so bizarre. I checked it against my hand, too big. My buddy's hands, too big. My youngest son's hands, too small. My oldest son's, also too small. When the girls came up from the basement, I had them put their hands next to it, both too small. Then they told me we kept them up all night. They thought my buddy and I had gotten drunk and were blasting 90s rock and metal. To be fair, we do that sometimes, but not that night. We hadn't had a single drink, and we turned off the videos after the Charlie game. All we'd done was talk excitedly. But the girls swore they heard loud thumping and constant heavy music. Their words, though they think Korn is heavy. The 18-year-old was convinced we'd thrown a full-on party with a bunch of friends. My sons, though, didn't hear a thing. It was weird, but we all just called it odd and moved on. That night, my buddy and I watched more videos about demons and deals. One claimed that just watching it meant you were part of a demonic summoning. The house started feeling off. Every creak and noise seemed unnatural, and we were both on edge. Eventually, we put on Aqua Teen Hunger Force and crashed in the same spots as the night before. The next morning, I checked the coffee table, which I'd wiped clean after the first handprint. Now there were two of the same weird prints, both facing me, with the same 4-digit, claw-like marks. The thumbs were in the same spot as human thumbs, but again, only 4 digits. My oldest son saw them and freaked out, saying it was the rake from that creepypasta story. I wasn't into creepypastas, so I had to look it up. I watched a few videos about it, but it didn't seem like a real explanation, just the claws and the idea of something watching me lined up a bit. The girls said they had another rough night, but this time it wasn't noise from upstairs. The basement lights kept turning on and off, and they heard scratching at their door and the outside door that leads to the woods at the edge of my property. We live on a mountain with a few acres, so scratching isn't crazy. Bears have even wandered onto my land before. But it still spooked them. The girls kept getting freaked out, and after the third morning of finding those handprints, I stopped noticing anything odd myself. The girls got so scared they moved upstairs and started sleeping on the other 2 sofas. So now all 4 adults in the house were crashing in the living room, while my sons stayed in their rooms. I have a bedroom, but I just don't like sleeping in beds. The girls kept having weird experiences in the bathroom, feeling watched, the shower curtain moving when no one was there. One morning, both my sons woke up with what looked like cat scratches on their chests. They were shallow, but it freaked them out because my cats only scratch me when I mess with them, like when I use them to get blood for the Charlie game. One night, all 4 of us heard scratching at the upstairs door, not the basement one. I'm a combat vet, so I've got firearms. My buddy and I went outside to check the area. We kept hearing rustling, so we followed it to the edge of the property, down by the basement. We noticed the basement light was on, and my buddy spotted movement through the windows. Some of the basement windows are covered with weatherproof plastic to prevent leaks, so we could only see the shadow of a head moving back and forth. Whoever it was didn't belong there, especially at night. We got to the basement door, which was wide open, and I shouted that we were armed and that if they came out now, we'd escort them off the property safely, but jumping out could get them hurt. No response, no sound, but all the lights were on. Most of the basement is open space, except for one finished room where the older girl stayed. She'd hung a blanket in place of a door. My buddy was behind me, and when I moved the blanket, every light in the basement shut off with a loud snap. My buddy yelled, "What is it?" and bolted outside. I followed him, but he later said he ran because he thought I had run past him in the dark, like my head had brushed by him. Except I hadn't moved until he did. I shut the door and put a cinder block in front of it. We went back upstairs, where the vibe was all wrong. The power had gone out up there too, but when the girls checked the breaker box in the upstairs broom closet, some weird 70s design, the power came back on without a hitch. I don't know if the basement lights came back on. We didn't check. The girls moved out after that. They still keep in touch and visit, but they won't stay overnight because they're convinced I let something loose with that Charlie game. I keep telling them I didn't get any of the wealth or influence I asked for, but they point out that a couple months after the game, the VA fixed their mistake and started paying me again. They also noted that my writing took off, and I've been making some money with a small following. Plus, my buddy sold his house. He was living with me even though he owned one for a ton of cash, which he used to travel before coming back here. Weird stuff kept happening around the house. We found strange footprints in the snow and mud on the patio and near the cars. We've heard noises in the basement and around the property. One time, the attic stairs were pulled down and left open for no reason. I sometimes wake up with shallow scratches on my head, arms, or legs, but they don't leave scars. Could be the cats, especially since I mess with them, but who knows? The running joke now is that Charlie needs to pay up if he's going to keep harassing us. My life's looking up, but I definitely didn't get the deal I was expecting. The girls think I let something out that's pissed off because my 30 for 30 deal was too fair, so it stuck being a minor nuisance while I mock it for not delivering my loot. I stand by my offer. 30 years for 30 years is fair, and it's going to take more than some creepy paw prints to change my mind. This happened a while back when I was a sophomore in high school, just wrapping up band practice. It was around 7:30 in the evening, and me and my friends were hanging out, chatting like we always did after practice to dodge the chaos in the band hall and just chill for a bit. We noticed one of our friends, a freshman, talking to his dad and his little sister nearby. None of us had ever met his dad before, but we'd heard he was kind of odd, so we didn't think much of it at first. After a while, this guy, supposedly our friend's dad, called us over. He looked a lot like my friend. Same hair, same skin tone, even similar mannerisms. But there was something off about him. He was greasy-looking, antsy, shuffling around, and wouldn't make eye contact. He seemed like he was in a big hurry to get out of there, and honestly, he was giving us weird vibes like he was sizing us up. Still, we brushed it off because, he's our friend's dad, and we'd heard he was strange, so we didn't question it too much. He started talking about how he was putting together a Cuban jazz ensemble and wanted me and my 3 trombone-playing friends to join. We were all huge jazz nerds back then, so when he mentioned we'd get paid for practices and gigs, we got super excited. He was really pushy about us leaving with him right then and there to meet the rest of his bandmates. We were hyped and ready to go, not thinking twice about it. Then I noticed this little girl standing next to him. She'd been super quiet the whole time, and I hadn't paid much attention to her until then. She looked really uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be there at all. Her body language was screaming something was wrong, but we were too caught up in the moment to clock it. Right then, our band director walked over. She was a no-nonsense, tough-as-nails kind of woman. I thought she was mad at us for taking too long to pack up, so when she asked who the guy was, I just said, "Oh, he's our friend's dad." Before I could finish, my friend cut me off, looking confused, and said, "What? That's not my dad." The mood shifted fast. The guy got visibly irritated, his face tightening up. Our director didn't hesitate. She told him he needed to leave now. That's when I really started noticing the little girl. She didn't look anything like this man. Different skin tone, different eye color, different hair. Nothing matched. I started wondering if she was even related to him, but it was just a gut feeling. The guy started arguing with our director, getting loud, saying she couldn't talk to him like that. He looked like he was about to lose it, maybe even throw a punch. The little girl grabbed his shirt, trying to hold him back, her voice shaky like she was on the verge of tears, begging him to stop and just go home. It was the first time she spoke, and it hit me hard. She was so thin, wearing just a t-shirt and shorts, and I could see bruises on her arms. She looked younger than us, maybe by a couple of years. By now, the commotion had drawn a crowd. 2 other band directors showed up, and the guy was starting to look cornered. He finally backed off, grabbing the girl and shuffling away as fast as he could without outright running. He tugged her along, and they disappeared to his car. The directors called the cops, who circled the area looking for him, but he was gone. No sign of him or his car. Later, we talked to our friend, and he told us the girl had approached him first, trying to get him to go to their car before the man even got out to talk. It was so bizarre, and we had no idea what was going on. I don't know what would have happened if we'd gone with him like he wanted. It creeps me out to think about. I completely forgotten about it until I was browsing Reddit recently, and it all came flooding back. Since then, we've met our friend's actual dad, and weirdly, They look super similar, which makes the whole thing even stranger. Whatever went down that day still sits heavy with me, and I'm just glad our director stepped in when she did. This happened when I was about 7 years old, growing up on a massive 5,000-acre farm and ranch in northern Michigan. Our land backed right up to a state forest, full of dense woods and open pastures, so we were used to the wild. It made us tough, me, my family, everyone. I was the only girl raised as a tomboy, and I'm still that way. We were all hardcore outdoorsy types, hunters, fishermen, you name it. Nothing really spooked us. My uncle, though, he was next level. He was a senior NCO in a Special Forces unit in the Navy, about 6'4", built like a wrestler, and trained in survival tactics. The guy was a rock. Nothing rattled him. Or so I thought. He was home on leave one time during deer season, and we went out hunting together. I'll never forget the day he came back to the house, shaking and crying. This was a man who'd tear someone apart before he'd let them see him break down. He was a mess, saying he saw something in the woods. My grandma tried to calm him down, but he kept muttering about seeing something like Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. It was so out of character, it freaked me out just seeing him like that. Grandma got my grandpa, and he rounded up the rest of the crew. My dad, our cousins, and even my uncle, who was still terrified but didn't want to look like a coward. They grabbed their shotguns, loaded up on ammo, saddled the horses, and headed out to scour the woods. Apparently, they knew about something called a dog man, but I was too young to be clued in, so I was just left in the dark. They told me to stay inside the house, no exceptions, until they got back. My dad and grandpa were dead serious, which wasn't like them, so I hid in my room, scared out of my mind. Sunset came, and they still weren't back. I was freaking out because they never stayed out past dark. But then I heard the horses galloping back to the barn and their voices outside. I was so relieved, but when they walked in, they looked shaken. They didn't say much, probably to keep me from freaking out more. At dinner, though, my dad laid down the law. I wasn't allowed to play outside or go to the barns alone anymore. I always had to have Grandpa with me. I was pissed, feeling like my freedom was being yanked away, but I could tell this was serious. The next morning, my dad and Grandpa taught me how to shoot a gun, which drove home how real this was. I overheard them talking the next night, and it gave me chills. They found tracks where my uncle had his sighting, big, weird dog-like tracks that weren't like anything they recognized. We were all experienced hunters. We knew animal tracks cold, but these stumped them. Even creepier, they found claw marks about 8 feet up in a tree. Michigan bears could make marks like that, but they found similar claw marks on trees all over our property. That winter, we lost 30 to 40 head of cattle, all mutilated in ways that didn't match coyote or bear attacks. Every time, those same weird wolf dog tracks were in the snow. That whole experience changed my uncle. He did multiple tours in Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom, but after that day, he was never the same. He went from never touching alcohol to always having a bottle of Jack in his hand. His eyes were haunted, like he was carrying something heavy. He stopped hunting, stopped going into the woods, and eventually stopped coming home to visit. He didn't even show up for my dad's funeral 2 years later. It broke my heart to watch him fall apart like that. He ended up taking his own life, and I truly believe whatever he saw out there broke him in a way that never healed. That thing in the woods, it didn't just scare him. It changed who he was, and in a way, it killed him. A while back, I decided I needed to get out there and meet new people. I wasn't exactly hunting for a relationship, just wanted to connect with folks. You know, bars weren't really my scene, so I downloaded a dating app like a lot of single college girls do. I chatted with a bunch of people online, and it gave me a confidence boost to actually go on a date every now and then. Most of the guys I met didn't make it past the first date, but one stood out for all the wrong reasons. I matched with this guy named Alex, and we made plans to go out to dinner. He said he wanted to take me to this fancy restaurant in a town halfway between us. Sounded nice, right? But when the day came, he ghosted me, didn't answer his phone at all. The next day, he hit me up with some excuse about getting stuck at work and forgetting his phone at home. I wasn't really buying it, but he asked to reschedule, and I stupidly said yes. So the new date rolls around, and he tells me to meet him at his house so we can drive to the restaurant together. He kept saying to come hungry like 3 times, reminding me not to eat beforehand, which I figured meant the place had huge portions or something. I wasn't thrilled about meeting a guy at his house for the first time and getting in his car, but we've been talking for over a week, so I thought, what the hell, let's do this. When I got close, he called and told me to park in a lot down the road from his place, which was weird, but I figured maybe his driveway was small or something. The thing is, I never told him what kind of car I drove, yet he pulled into the parking lot right behind me and texted, saying he was parked 2 spots down. That was my first red flag. How did he know my car? I brushed it off and got into his car, against my better judgment. We started driving to the restaurant, which I knew was maybe 10 minutes away on a major highway. But almost 25 minutes later, we're cruising down these dark, sketchy back roads. I looked at him and said, "Hey, where the heck are we going?" He casually admitted he hadn't told me the full story. Apparently, when he called to make reservations, it took 3 tries before someone answered, and they told him the restaurant had moved to a new location, giving him some vague directions about an intersection. My stomach dropped when I realized we'd passed an intersection like 5 minutes ago, and he wasn't even using an address in his GPS, even though it was on. Red flag number 2. I pulled up the restaurant on my own GPS, and it said the place was closed for the day. Red flag number 3. At this point, I knew I was being dumb, but I didn't bail. We kept driving, and he was acting all creepy, saying stuff like, "Don't worry, I know a place we can go." He drove even further into the middle of nowhere, pulled over by some trail in the woods, and said we had to walk the rest of the way to go stargazing. He kept going on about how beautiful the spot was, but then he started cracking these weird jokes about how he swore he wasn't a serial killer, and made me promise I wouldn't steal his keys and ditch him. Red flag number 4. We got to a clearing, and I was trying to stay calm, but the whole night he kept lying to me. He'd tell these long, detailed stories about his life, then end with, "Just kidding, that never happened." It was funny the first time, like when he said he got so drunk in college he got a piercing down there. But after 2 hours of this nonsense, I realized I didn't know a single true thing about this guy. Red flag number 5. I was kicking myself for sticking around. At one point, we talked about going back to his place to watch a movie, and he seemed into it. But then he changed his mind, pulled over in front of a park, and said he'd rather stay there. He started pushing me to run through the park naked, asking super personal, creepy questions about my sexual experiences. Not general stuff, but specific, invasive details. Then he straight up asked if I was going to kiss him before the night was over, saying he wanted to put on chapstick first. He made me dig through my purse for chapstick while he sat there, licking his lips dramatically and not of subtly rubbing himself through his pants. I told him I didn't have any, and he was like, "That's fine. Why don't you crawl over here and show me what you got?" while patting his lap. I told him flat out I wasn't comfortable and had no intention of hooking up with anyone on a first date. He reached around, trying to pull me onto his lap, grabbing my arm to get leverage. I shut that down, saying I wasn't going to sleep with him or give him any kind of preview. He kept pushing, saying it was fine, but maybe I could just give him a minute or 2 of something, trying to grab my hand again and put it on his lap. I was furious. This was after days of him telling me how much he hated guys who forced themselves on women, how he couldn't understand how anyone could get off on that. He even said he didn't want to sit too close while we were stargazing so I wouldn't feel weird. It was like a switch flipped, and he turned into a completely different person. I told him trying to force me wasn't going to make me any more likely to agree, and I thought he was supposed to be a gentleman, like he'd been claiming all night. He laughed it off, saying I was probably just scared of how big it was, and that there were other options if I didn't want to do anything. I shut him down again, and he started pouting like a kid. I was racking my brain for an excuse to get him to drive me back to my car when he suddenly pulled out his phone, looked at a text, and said his uncle, who he lived with, had some emergency at home and he needed to get back ASAP. I was done at this point, emergency or not. I hate being lied to, especially when someone acts the complete opposite of what they've been preaching. He drove me back to my car, dropped me off in a dark parking lot at midnight, and peeled out before I even got to my driver's door. There was no way I was going on a second date with this creep. A few days later, I drove by the restaurant's old location and found out it never moved. It's still open, right on the highway, about 2 minutes from his supposed house, which I'm pretty sure doesn't even exist. So where the hell was he taking me that night? The whole thing still gives me the creeps.